From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
You know, Betsy DeVos's nomination is very personal to many people who live in Michigan because Betsy DeVos is from Michigan. And her vision of education and her actions have unfortunately played a major role in undermining our public schools.
The Democrats launch a 24-hour protest on the Senate floor in a last-ditch effort to block the nomination of Trump's education secretary. But unless a third Republican votes against Betsy DeVos, the vote will be 50-50, forcing Vice President Mike Pence to cast the deciding vote, an event that has never happened to any other presidential nominee in history. We'll speak to California Congresswoman Maxine Waters about DeVos and why she's already talking about the need to impeach Donald Trump.
Your words, your actions have shown us that you don't respect us, that both you and all of your nominees for your cabinet posts are dangerous for us and all of our families.
Plus, we'll take a look at Donald Trump's foreign policy from Iran to Russia to Mexico.
We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen anymore.
We'll speak with Harvard professor Stephen Walt about his article, Trump Has Already Blown It. We'll also talk to an Iranian-American doctoral student who's just returned to school in New York after first being blocked from re-entering the country thanks to Trump's Muslim ban. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Capitol Hill, Senate Democrats are in the middle of a 24-hour debate seeking to delay the confirmation of billionaire Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary. DeVos is perhaps Trump's most contested pick among a group of controversial cabinet nominees who are overwhelmingly white male millionaires and billionaires. DeVos is a longtime backer of charter schools and vouchers for private and religious schools. She and her husband have also invested in a student debt collection agency that does business with the Education Department. On Monday, Senate Democrats took to the floor of the U.S. Senate to begin the 24-hour debate in efforts to convince a third Republican to join them and vote against DeVos, which would sink her confirmation. This is Washington Senator Patty Murray.
Madam President, this nomination is dead even right now, on the razor's edge. 50 senators, Democrats and Republicans, will vote to reject Betsy DeVos. And we need just one more Republican to join us, to stand on the side of students and parents and public education in America and say no to Betsy DeVos.
Last week, two Republican lawmakers, Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, announced plans to vote against DeVos, leaving Senate Republicans one vote short of confirming her. If the Senate vote is 50-50, Vice President Mike Pence would then cast the deciding vote, an event that has never happened to any other presidential nominee in history. Parents and teachers have been flooding the Senate phone system, calling lawmakers to demand they oppose her confirmation. Nearly all Democratic senators are expected to also vote against the nominations of Tom Price to head the Department of Health and Human Services, Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Andrew Puzder for Labor Secretary, and Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary, which the Washington Post calls a, quote, historic rebuke of a first-term president's cabinet selections, unquote. We'll have more on the ongoing Senate debate over Betsy DeVos after headlines. A federal appeals court will hear arguments today on whether to restore President Donald Trump's executive order banning people from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen from entering the United States. The hearing is to review an order by a lower court judge to put Trump's directive on hold. On Monday, more than 100 companies, including tech giants Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Twitter, and Uber, filed documents with the court saying they oppose Trump's Muslim ban. Top former officials, including former Secretaries of State John Kerry and Madeleine Albright, also filed documents with the court Monday saying they oppose the ban. Over the last 2 weekends, tens of thousands of people have protested in nationwide demonstrations against Trump's Muslim ban. In one of the latest protests, about 20 rabbis were arrested Monday night, blocking the street near Trump Tower in Manhattan in protest of the ban. President Donald Trump falsely claimed Monday during a speech to U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida that the media is intentionally covering up terrorist attacks.
You've seen what happened in Paris and Nice. All over Europe, it's happening. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it.
The claims appear to be part of a wider push by the White House to increase fear about potential and even imaginary terrorist attacks in order to justify President Trump's crackdown on immigration, including his Muslim ban. Later on Monday, after pressure from media outlets, the White House released a list of what it claims are 78 terrorist attacks since 2014 that it says have not received sufficient coverage. Many of the attacks on the list caused no fatalities, and almost all were carried out outside the United States. The list includes attacks that received such an onslaught of media attention that they're still recognized by only one word, such as Nice or Orlando. The list also included multiple misspellings, including misspelling the name of San Bernardino. In response, California Congressman Pete Aguilar tweeted, quote, "You can't even spell San Bernardino, but you exploit our community to justify your Muslim ban," unquote. Meanwhile, new information has emerged showing that counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, has repeatedly made false claims about a non-existent terrorist attack, which she called the Bowling Green massacre. Conway's comments first sparked controversy after a February 2nd interview with MSNBC's Chris Matthews, in which she attempted to justify President Trump's Muslim ban by citing a terrorist attack in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which never happened.
I bet it's brand new information to people that President Obama had a 6-month ban on the Iraqi refugee program after 2 Iraqis came here to this country, were radicalized, and they were the masterminds behind the Bowling Green massacre. Most people don't know that because it didn't get covered.
After widespread criticism, Conway said she misspoke when she said massacre, and that she intended to refer to the case of 2 Iraqi men living in Bowling Green who were arrested in 2011 on charges of having attempted to send money and weapons to al-Qaeda in Iraq. Their arrest led the Obama administration to implement a more extensive screening process for Iraqi refugees, but not to impose a ban on Iraqi resettlement. However, it's now clear that Conway did not misspeak at all, as video and quotes of her making the same claims in 2 previous interviews have surfaced. In an interview with Cosmopolitan on January 29th, she falsely claimed, quote, 2 Iraqi nationals came to this country, joined ISIS, traveled back to the Middle East to get trained and refine their terrorism skills, and come back here and were the masterminds behind the Bowling Green massacre of taking innocent soldiers' lives away, unquote. This is not true. On that same day, Conway did an interview with TMZ in which she made the same false claim.
It was President Obama and the Congress who identified these 7 countries. So President Trump is just following on. President Obama suspended the Iraq refugee program for 6 months in 2011, and no one certainly covered it. I think nobody noticed. He did that because, I assume, because there were 2 Iraqis who came here, got radicalized, joined ISIS, and then were the masterminds behind the Bowling Green attack on our brave soldiers.
Senior advisor to the Democratic National Committee, Zach Patkanis, said in response, quote, "The Trump administration was so desperate to sell their increasingly unpopular and likely illegal anti-Muslim ban that they actually made up a terrorist attack to scare people into acceptance," unquote. Media watchdogs have called on cable networks to stop booking Kellyanne Conway for interviews because of her lies. In Britain, Speaker of the Commons John Bercow says he will refuse to invite Donald Trump to address the British Parliament during Trump's upcoming state visit, citing Trump's racism and sexism.
After the imposition of the migrant ban by President Trump, I am even more strongly opposed to an address by President Trump in Westminster Hall. I feel very strongly that our opposition to racism and to sexism and our support for equality before the law and an independent judiciary are hugely important considerations in the House of Commons.
More than 1.8 million Brits have also signed a petition seeking to stop Trump's state visit entirely, arguing, quote, he should not be allowed to make an official state visit because it would cause embarrassment to Her Majesty, the Queen, unquote. The British Parliament slated to debate the petition on February 20th. Back in the United States, New England Patriots tight end Martellus Bennett says he will not visit the White House with the rest of his Super Bowl winning team because of his opposition to Donald Trump. President Trump has acknowledged his plans to dismantle the Dodd-Frank financial reforms are inspired in part by a desire to help his banking friends. Dodd-Frank is a set of financial reforms implemented after the 2008 financial crisis. This is President Trump speaking at a dinner that included J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon Friday.
And to do what we have to do in terms of regulation. We have some of the bankers here. There's nobody better to tell me about Dodd-Frank than Jamie, so you're going to tell me about it. But we expect to be cutting a lot out of Dodd-Frank because, frankly, I have so many people, friends of mine, that have nice businesses. They can't borrow money. They just can't get any money because the banks just won't let them borrow because of the rules and regulations.
First Lady Melania Trump is suing the owner of the media outlet The Daily Mail over an article published last August that falsely reported Melania once worked for an escort service. The lawsuit, which seeks $150 million in damages, claims the article hurt Melania's chances at making millions of dollars by selling a brand of beauty and fashion products while she's, quote, one of the most photographed women in the world, unquote. Her lawyer is Charles Harder, who also represented Hulk Hogan in his $140 million lawsuit against Gawker, which caused Gawker to shut down. President George W. Bush's White House ethics counselor, Richard Painter, told the Washington Post, the lawsuit appears to suggest Melania Trump sought to profit from her role as First Lady, saying, quote, there has never been a First Lady of the United States who insinuated that she intended to make a lot of money because of the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of being First Lady, unquote. In a shocking new report on Syria, Amnesty International says as many as 13,000 people have been hanged in a Syrian government military prison between 2011 and 2015. Amnesty calls the hangings part of a deliberate policy of extermination. The group says the majority of the 13,000 people hanged were civilians opposed to the Assad regime. This is Amnesty International's Lynn Malouf.
The new findings in this report are about a systematic campaign of mass hangings, whereby every week, usually on Mondays and Wednesdays, groups of detainees, of between 20 to 50 detainees, would be taken from their cells, told that they would be transferred to civilian detentions. But instead of that, they were taken to a cell in another building inside of Sidnaya, where they would be hanged.
The Israeli parliament has approved a highly contentious bill to retroactively legalize Jewish-only settlements built on private Palestinian land in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Its passage was celebrated by far-right Israeli politicians who called Monday a, quote, historic day for the settlement movement, unquote. The legislation is uniformly opposed by Palestinians and is highly divisive within Israeli politics. Israel's Attorney General calls the legislation unconstitutional and a violation of international law. This is opposition leader Isaac Herzog.
Do not give your hand to this insane law that threatens to destroy Israeli democracy. Israel's international stand threatens IDF commanders and threatens leaders of the state and stands in complete opposition to the opinion of the Attorney General.
In breaking news from Afghanistan, at least 19 people have been killed in a suicide bomb attack outside the Supreme Court building in the capital, Kabul. At least 40 more people were wounded. The death toll may rise. No one's claimed responsibility for the attack so far. And here in New York City, high school and college students are planning a walkout today to protest President Trump and his executive order seeking to ban people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. It's the latest in a series of student walkouts and protests nationwide to oppose Trump's immigration crackdown. In recent weeks, students have also held mass demonstrations demanding their universities become sanctuary campuses, calling on the administration to refuse to cooperate with Trump's plans to speed up deportations. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Senate is scheduled to hold a full vote today on the confirmation of Donald Trump's nominee for Education Secretary, billionaire Betsy DeVos. DeVos is perhaps Trump's most contested pick among a group of controversial cabinet nominees. DeVos is a longtime backer of charter schools and vouchers for private and religious schools. She and her husband have also invested in a student debt collection agency that does business with the Education Department. On Monday, Senate Democrats took to the floor of the U.S. Senate to begin a 24-hour protest opposing her appointment. This is Michigan Senate Democrat Debbie Stabenow.
You know, Betsy DeVos's nomination is very personal to many people who live in Michigan because Betsy DeVos is from Michigan. And her vision of education and her actions have unfortunately played a major role in undermining our public schools. Families all across our state can tell the story of her work with Michigan schools firsthand because they've seen it firsthand. They've lived it firsthand. And they all say the same thing. Democrats, Republicans, independents, people who live in cities that are big and small cities, and parents and teachers and principals and community leaders from across the state. Overwhelmingly, they've told me that Betsy DeVos should not be our next Secretary of Education.
Yes.
Last week, two Republican lawmakers, Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, announced plans to vote against DeVos, leaving Senate Republicans one vote short of confirming her. If the Senate vote is 50-50, Vice President Mike Pence would then cast the deciding vote, an event that has never happened to any other presidential nominee in history.
If only one more Republican senator decides to vote against her, Betsy DeVos's confirmation will be rejected. For more on DeVos and other nominees in the Trump cabinet, as well as a call for impeachment, we're joined by Congressmember Maxine Waters of Los Angeles. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Congressmember Waters. Can you start off by talking about what's happening with Betsy DeVos and why you are opposed to her?
Yes, certainly. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. I started talking about Betsy DeVos when I was at the Women's March. I identified three people, three of his nominees. One was Jeff Sessions, one was Betsy DeVos, and the other was Mnuchin, because they stood out as unqualified, unfit, and should not be heading these important agencies of government. Betsy DeVos has no experience, no background. You know, she, of course, never attended public school herself. Her children never attended public school. She's never served on a school board, never taught. She's never done anything except make big donations to Trump and others. So this billionaire wannabe teacher is now in the position where there's a big fight going on in the Senate, and it looks as if it's a 50-50 kind of it's a split. And the split, the tie rather, would have to be broken by the vice president. And so unless the Democrats can get a third vote, she may end up being the Secretary of Education, which would be a shame. She does not care about public education. She's into charter schools and privatization of education. And all around this country, educators are alarmed. You know, we have parents who are against this nomination and against her becoming the Education Secretary. I just hope that they can get a third Republican to join with the Democrats to stop her from becoming the Education Secretary.
Well, Congressman Waters, in her hearings, she really showed a remarkable lack of understanding of some of the basic issues in education. Even the Detroit Free Press, the main newspaper in Michigan, claimed that she was not qualified for the job and she was actually more a lobbyist. But I wanted to go to Senator Elizabeth Warren, speaking on Monday on the floor to oppose the nomination of Betsy DeVos, where she talked about what happened at her confirmation hearing.
During her confirmation hearing, I gave her the opportunity to show that she is at least serious about standing up for students. I asked her basic, straightforward questions about her commitment to protecting students and taxpayers from fraud by these shady for-profit colleges. Her response was shocking. She refused to commit to use the department's many tools and resources to keep students from getting cheated when fraudulent colleges break the law. And in her responses to my written questions, she even refused to commit to doing what the law requires by canceling the loans of students who've been cheated by law-breaking colleges. An education secretary who is unwilling to cut off federal aid to colleges that break the law and cheat students would be a disaster for both students and for taxpayers.
That was Senator Elizabeth Warren. Congresswoman Waters, do you have any expectation or hope that this nomination can be derailed with one more Republican vote?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I appreciate those questions that were asked by Senator Warren. Both of us have worked very hard to try and get rid of these private post-secondary schools that are ripping off the taxpayers and the students. We were very successful in the work that we did with Corinthian, but there are many more out there for far too long have been receiving taxpayer money and not providing any real education or career opportunities for these students who sign up for these schools. Many of them are recruited from welfare lines in housing projects. They target the poorest of students, and they get them to sign on the dotted line to get the student loans. They take that money, and many of them do nothing. And when these students end up coming out of these schools, they can't get jobs, they can't pay back the loans, and they are basically put in a very difficult situation for many, many years, not been able to rent or live in public housing, other kinds of things that they're prohibited from doing because they have not been able to pay the loans back. So yes, she's a disaster. I am so hopeful that they can get this third vote. I know that there are Republicans there who know that she's not qualified. Some of them may be a bit intimidated by the president and don't want to cross him at this point. But if they care about the students, if they really care about education, they will do that. They will step up to the plate, and they will join with the other two Republicans and the Democrats and deny her this confirmation.
Congressmember Waters, I also wanted to ask you about Treasury Secretary nominee Steven Mnuchin. During his confirmation hearing last month, the former Goldman Sachs executive defended himself against accusations he used a tax haven in the Cayman Islands in order to avoid paying taxes.
Let me just be clear again. I did not use a Cayman Island entity in any way to avoid taxes for myself. I paid U.S. taxes on all that income, okay? So there was no benefit to me from the Cayman entity. As I said, the Cayman entity was set up to accommodate nonprofit and pension funds that want to invest through offshore and a certain number of offshore.
Mnuchin has deep ties on Wall Street, including working as a partner for Goldman Sachs, where his father also worked. Mnuchin's hedge fund also played a role in the housing crisis after it scooped up the failing California bank IndyMac in 2008. Under Mnuchin's ownership, IndyMac foreclosed on 36,000 families, particularly elderly residents trapped in reverse mortgages. He was accused of running a foreclosure machine. The bank, which was renamed One West, was also accused of racially discriminatory lending practices. In 2015, Mnuchin sold the bank for $3.4 billion, $1.8 billion more than he had bought it for. During an appearance on CNBC, he was asked about One West Bank allegedly violating the Fair Housing Act by redlining.
Let me tell you, one of the most proud aspects of my career was buying IndyMac during the financial crisis. We bought it from the government in a highly competitive 6-month auction. And we saved a lot of jobs, and we created a lot of opportunities for corporate loans. Now, one aspect of that is we bought the worst mortgage portfolio in the history of time. IndyMac was about 30% delinquent loans. So all the loans that we unfortunately had to foreclose on, we didn't originate those. Those were IndyMac loans. Right. And the deal, when we merged with CIT, was the first bank deal to be approved post-Dodd-Frank over $50 billion. So we went through a 1-year comment period with the OCC and the Fed. These same community groups protested against the deal. The regulators looked at the deal and thought it made sense.
That's Treasury Secretary nominee Steve Mnuchin. Congressmember Waters, this is personal for you. You're from Los Angeles. The protests were in your area, outside his house, protesting what they called the foreclosure machine.
Yes, absolutely. I know something about Steve Mnuchin. As a matter of fact, I was contacted and asked to sit in on some efforts that were being made by nonprofits to get him to, make real investments in the community, rather than simply being known as the foreclosure king, having, of course, foreclosed on about 36,000 families and homes. And they were asking him to support the work of the nonprofits and asking him to make up for the problems that he had caused in communities with these foreclosures. Many of the homes that belonged in his portfolio were not kept up. The grass grew up. The windows were boarded up. It helped to drive down the value of other homes in the area. And, of course, he is guilty of redlining and not having the bank make loans in minority communities. And so he comes with a bad reputation. And just to know that he bought those loans from IndyMac and got them, I believe, very cheaply, and then made over $1 billion on them is quite disturbing. And this is what we're going to have. As Treasury Secretary, he would be the one to convene all of the agencies dealing with financial services under something called FSOC. And so whether you're talking about FDIC or OCC or the feds, et cetera, all of them would be convened regularly for FSOC under the leadership of the Treasury. That is not good for this country. I don't think he should have that kind of huge power and responsibility. And so this is typical of what this president is doing. He's picking from Wall Street. He's picking from the financial services industry, those people who have made a lot of money, who were responsible for that meltdown that we had with subprime loans. He knows exactly what he's doing. And don't forget, Donald Trump said he made money during the crisis, and I'm told that he set about teaching students in the so-called Trump University how they can make money in such a crisis.
And Congresswoman Waters, about the other nominee you mentioned, Jeff Sessions, for Attorney General, you're completely opposed to his appointment. Could you say why?
Yes, Jeff Sessions comes with a reputation of, he was not confirmed, I think, when he tried to get confirmed in 1986, and he didn't get confirmed then because of a racist background. I think he's a throwback. He's still the same Jeff Sessions now as he was then. I don't think that he should be in the position of being the Attorney General of this country, overseeing the Civil Rights Division that has a responsibility for making sure that people's civil rights are not violated, and moving very aggressively to deal with local police departments. As a matter of fact, he does not believe that the government should have a role dealing with troubled local police departments, like in Ferguson, where the Justice Department went in to try and work out the problems that had been brewing for years in that city. But he does not believe that that's a role for the Justice Department.
Interestingly, they cannot rush ahead with the vote for Senator Sessions to be Attorney General, because if he's confirmed, there will be one less Republican senator, and they're afraid that then Betsy DeVos, they could not get approved. So they have to get her confirmed before they confirm Senator Sessions. Finally, Congressmember Maxine Waters, you're talking about the impeachment of Donald Trump. Why?
Well, here's what I'm saying in response to questions that I'm getting. What can we do? How are we going to put up with him for 4 more years? I answered by saying I don't intend to put up with him for 4 more years. I think that he has defined himself. He has raised serious questions about whether or not he should be the leader of our country. I am asking that the investigations really look into whether or not, for example, that was collusion with Putin and the Kremlin as they hacked into our DNC, as they hacked into our DCCC and to members of Congress. What was going on? If he was involved, if his president of his campaign was involved with the Kremlin, et cetera, then I think that is grounds for impeachment. And so I'm saying I'm willing to do everything to get to the bottom of this relationship and what happened. And I certainly think there's no question, if there was collusion, if there was strategizing, if there was planning, if he had knowledge about this hacking, then I certainly believe he should be impeached.
So how do you go about investigating this?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to put pressure on the committees that are now saying that they're going to do the investigations. You have the Intelligence Committee on the Senate side, and you have one of the House committees talking about doing the investigations. I've put together a concurrent resolution that identifies steps I think they should take and the way that they should drill down. And so educating the public so that the public can put pressure on these investigations to make sure they're not just whitewashed, that they're real investigations to get at the truth. I think we have to fight and press very hard in order to get at the truth, and I think that it is possible to do that. We cannot think that somehow we can't find out what's going on. If, in fact, they discovered that he was hacking, they can discover other things about him and Manafort and what they were doing.
Congressmember Maxine Waters from Los Angeles, California, thanks so much for being with us. Congressmember Waters is a Democrat who serves as a ranking member of the House Committee on Financial Services. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a graduate student who was blocked by President Trump's Muslim ban finally makes it back into the United States. She joins us. Stay with us. Why I Say No by Jay Sum, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, a federal appeals court will hear arguments today on whether to restore President Donald Trump's executive order banning people from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen from entering the United States. On Monday, more than 100 companies, including tech giants Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Twitter, and Uber, filed documents with the court saying they oppose Trump's Muslim ban. Top former officials, including former Secretaries of State John Kerry and Madeleine Albright, also filed documents saying they oppose the ban.
Lawyers for the states of Washington and Minnesota filed a brief to the court Monday, arguing to reinstate the ban would unleash chaos again. The ban was temporarily halted Friday when U.S. District Court Judge James Robart in Seattle issued a nationwide temporary restraining order on the ban.
The court concludes that the circumstances that brought it here today are such that we must intervene to fulfill the judiciary's constitutional role in our tripart government. Therefore, the court concludes that entry of the above-described TRO is necessary, and the state's motion is hereby granted.
Judge Robart's ruling sparked multiple outbursts on Twitter by President Trump, who called him a so-called judge. Robart was appointed by President George W. Bush and unanimously confirmed by the Senate in 2004. One of Trump's tweets read, quote, "Just cannot believe a judge would put our country in such peril. If something happens, blame him and court system. People pouring in, bad," unquote. Over the weekend, the Department of Homeland Security began allowing visa holders affected by Trump's order to board U.S.-bound flights.
Well, for more, we're joined by one of the people who was caught up in Trump's ban, Soira Rafai. She's a doctoral student enrolled at CUNY Graduate Center through an F-1 visa. Rafai spent winter break visiting her family in her native Iran. She was trying to return to New York to school when customs officers in Abu Dhabi told her she couldn't go back because of the president's executive order. We're also joined by Hadi Qaemi, the founder and director of the Campaign for Human Rights in Iran. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Soira, why don't you describe what happened to you?
Well, I was at Tehran airport in line. I was about to check in when I heard that Donald Trump has signed the order. And I got on the flight to Abu Dhabi, but there I was told that I cannot get on the flight to New York. So I had to stay there for about 18 hours, along with 11 other Iranians, before we could get on the flight back to Tehran.
Were you shocked?
Well, no, because I think it was on Wednesday that we heard that such an order was going to be signed. So I was kind of prepared for that. But it was... the people were shocked because so many people had changed their flights. They had changed their plans. They wanted to go back to the U.S. In March, for example, but they had to change their plans and get on the flight and find a flight. And they were really shocked and disappointed. And I heard so many heartbreaking stories at the airport.
Now, you were, then you stayed in Abu Dhabi for several days, or what?
No,
what happened?
For 18 hours.
For 18 hours.
Yeah.
And then you were finally able to get back on another flight into...
Tehran.
Back to Tehran.
Back to Tehran, yeah.
I see.
And then how did you end up coming back?
Well, on Friday, I heard that because of the court order in Massachusetts, Lufthansa airline lets people from these 7 countries board. So I got on the flight to Boston, and then when I was on my way here, the other court order was signed, and so I went to Boston first, and then came back.
Now, could you mentioned that you had run to other people at the airport. Could you talk about some of the stories of some of the people that you then on social media talked about as well?
Well, yeah, I talked about a friend of mine. She lives here, and she wanted to go back to Tehran to visit her sister who had cancer, but she had to cancel her flight, and on Friday her sister died. So, and there are lots.
So she never got to see her sister.
No, she didn't. And but what I want to say is that I mean, because the Iranians are professionals here. Some of them are students. I mean, they have a louder voice here. But my concern is that there are so many other people from other countries who have worse situations and are, for example, fleeing war, and they don't have any home to go back to. And those people are being denied entry to this country. And that is really, I mean, disastrous. I think we should focus more on their stories. I mean, my story is not a good example of what people are going through.
I want to turn to Fox host Bill O'Reilly's Super Bowl interview with President Trump.
So another big week for the Trump administration. Judge Gorsuch, that rollout went very smoothly, I think.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
But the refugee deal, not so much.
I think it was very smooth. You had 109 people out of hundreds of thousands of travelers, and all we did was vet those people very, very carefully.
You wouldn't do anything differently if you had to do it over again?
Look, in life,
some of your people didn't really know what the order was.
Well, that's not what General Kelly said. General Kelly, who's now Secretary Kelly, he said he totally knew, he was aware of it, and it was very smooth. It was 109 people.
So that's Donald Trump. Your response, Soira, and also your studies. You say your studies help you understand what's going on today.
Yeah, I've been studying social psychology, fascism for some years, and I'm really somehow shocked by the similarity between, for example, Trump's literature and the content of his speeches to the propaganda of Nazism or the American agitators in the 40s and 50s. And what is going on there is that he is using the discontent of the people and their feeling of insecurity and powerlessness and their uncertainty about their future. And he's targeting all these feelings against people who are not responsible for it, who are victims, just like many of his audience. And I think, I mean, that is what really worries me. I don't know, well, where this would end. I mean, I think, I mean, I was shocked by, I listened to so many of his speeches during the primaries, and I was shocked by the lack of any kind of rational argument. He does not talk about the causes of the problems. He just uses, he just focuses on this feeling of frustration among his audience, and he is using Muslims and immigrants as scapegoats. So
I'd like to ask Hadi Gaemi, you're from the Campaign for Human Rights in Iran. You hear Trump saying it was only 109 people, but the numbers of people affected by this ban are phenomenal. Just Iranian students in the United States alone is about 12,000 of them. I've heard that as many as 17,000 university students are from the 7 countries that are subjected to this temporary ban. Your response to that 109 figure?
No, it absolutely, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people over time. Yeah, maybe there were 109 on the few flights that were coming in on a given day. As you mentioned, there are 17,000 students from these countries. There are tens of thousands of people on work visas in this country from those 7 countries, including the staff of my own organization, that we now don't know what's going to happen when it's time for renewal. There are many people on green card, again, hundreds of thousands of them, and their policy on green card keeps changing all the time. So we're talking about lives of, I would say, much, much larger number of people being impacted. And there is, again, no rationality to this order. I think it was very important yesterday when Judge Robart asked the government lawyer in the Court of Appeals that what is the rationality and what is your fact for issuing this executive order? And they had none. They really had none. This is what's mind-boggling, a policy that is upending lives of so many people with no rationality.
And this will be an unusual hearing at 6 o'clock today because one of the judges is a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit. One of the judges is in Hawaii, another one is in Arizona, and one is in San Francisco. So they're going to be doing a telephone hearing, in effect. Your expectation of the judiciary handling, how it's handling this?
I think this is extremely a critical moment for American democracy and the soul of what we call checks and balances in this country after from founding of this country. If the judiciary cannot stand up to these irrational actions early on, I'm worried by the time the Supreme Court has been picked and completely tilted toward Trump's preferences, we are going to have no institutions to do checks and balances because Congress is failing already. The Republican Party is completely failing its own principles. And today's hearing will be a benchmark for seeing where are we headed to.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Hadi Gaemi is with the Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, and Soira Rafii is a PhD candidate at the CUNY Graduate Center. Before I met you, I knew everything about you, Soira, because so many people, it seemed like the entire university was rallying behind you to get you back to the United States.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful to all those people, and especially the union that I'm a member of, PSC. And as I said, I was fortunate enough to have the support of a union, and I was a member of a union. And I think in this situation, I'm convinced more than ever how important the unions are. And I just wanted to mention that I know here in New York, there are so many students from private universities who have been trying to and fighting to get their right to have a union, and the administration of the universities are denying them this right. And I'm also aware of so many other cases whose universities and schools are not as supportive as CUNY was to me. And I'm really worried about these things because I think here, I mean, one aspect of this whole situation is that what is at stake is the independence of academia. And I hope, and I think it's really necessary that the schools, the academia takes a step and tries to defend its independence.
Soira Rafii, PhD candidate at CUNY Graduate Center. That's the City University of New York. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Harvard University professor Stephen Walt on Donald Trump's foreign policy. Stay with us. Ross Byrne by Halfwave here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to look at President Trump's emerging foreign policy. Last week, Trump reportedly abruptly ended a call with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull after complaining about the terms of a refugee deal between the U.S. and Australia. Meanwhile, during a call with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, Trump reportedly threatened to send U.S. troops to Mexico. Speaking last week, the president urged Americans not to worry.
When you hear about the tough phone calls I'm having, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. They're tough. We have to be tough. It's time we're going to be a little tough, folks. We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen anymore.
In another foreign policy development, the Middle East, Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, announced the United States was putting Iran on notice. But it's not clear what that means. Meanwhile, Trump's first covert operation in Yemen went disastrously wrong. One U.S. Navy SEAL and as many as 23 Yemeni civilians died as a result. Leaders in Europe are openly expressing concern about Trump's actions, including his apparent close ties to Russia. Last week, the president of the European Council warned Trump was a potential threat to the European Union.
And Trump is facing opposition even in Britain. On Monday, the Speaker of the Commons said he would refuse to invite Trump to address the British Parliament during Trump's upcoming state visit, citing Trump's racism and sexism. To talk more about Trump's foreign policy, we're joined by Stephen Walt, international relations professor at Harvard University. His recent piece in Foreign Policy is headlined, "Trump has already blown it." How, Professor Walt? How has he blown it?
Well, I think you could argue that Trump had an opportunity when he was elected to move American foreign policy in a somewhat different direction, and there would actually have been substantial public support for that, away from military interventionism, trying to get a more even distribution of labor with some of our key allies, working for economic arrangements that benefited Main Street as much as they benefited Wall Street. So he could have done that. Of course, he's done the exact opposite. He's been picking fights with some of our traditional allies, and doing that to no good purpose, with no real end in mind. He's inexplicably continued to defend the bad behavior of Vladimir Putin, and he's got a completely contradictory approach to the Middle East that isn't likely to accomplish any of the objectives we might have there. Now, that's a lot to do in 2 weeks, and it's possible, of course, that there'll be some quick corrections and they'll get back on an even keel. But so far, this does not appear to be a foreign policy that's very promising, even for people who might have supported him.
And Professor Walt, in this clip we just played, his emphasis on being able to talk tough, and this notion that the rest of the world is taking advantage of the United States. How is that played in the rest of the world?
As you might expect, very badly. I mean, these initial phone calls are sort of get-acquainted opportunities with some key world leaders. And for Trump to pick a fight, essentially, and to treat the Prime Minister of Australia, remember, this is one of our closest allies in Asia. This is a country whose soldiers fought with ours in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, and in fact still have soldiers in Iraq today. This is one of our closest allies, and to treat the Prime Minister there in their initial phone call with a certain degree of contempt played very badly in Australia, as you might expect.
One of the first... I want to turn to Fox host Bill O'Reilly's Super Bowl interview with President Trump.
You talked to Putin last week. You had a busy week last week.
A busy week, yeah. Busy week and a half.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you? Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. And if Russia helps us in the fight against ISIS, which is a major fight, and Islamic terrorism all over the world,
right,
major fight, that's a good thing. Will I get along with him? I have no idea.
He's a killer, though. Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done, too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different than...
A lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So a lot of killers around, believe me.
We've got a lot of killers. You think our country is so innocent? Professor Stephen Walt, your response.
Well, first of all, Trump is in fact correct that the United States has made a lot of mistakes in its foreign policy, and some of those mistakes have had real human consequences. So that's correct. The problem here is that, first of all, he's equating Russian behavior with our behavior, and I think there are some clear differences. But more importantly, he's using our mistakes to excuse what Russia may be doing today. My mom used to tell me that two wrongs don't make a right, and for him to essentially say, well, it's okay what Russia is doing, it's okay to prosecute, persecute, possibly murder journalists, it's okay to destabilize other countries, it's okay to invade the sovereign territory of other countries, etc., because, after all, we've done similar things, is not, it seems to me, a constructive way to approach our relationship with Russia, and it's certainly not a way to try and improve our relations with other countries. If we've made mistakes in the past, then what we should be doing is learning from them and not repeating them, as opposed to using them as a way to excuse the behavior of countries that we have to deal with, and we have to establish a reasonably constructive relationship, but one that's also based on mutual respect.
Well, Professor Walt, I wanted to ask you about the situation with Mexico, because, as you mentioned, Trump did say often during the debates and in his campaign that he was against nation building, against so many foreign adventures. But yet, in one of his first phone calls with the president of Mexico, he warns that if Mexico doesn't handle its situation, its crime situation, he may have to send in troops to do it for them.
Yeah, they later claimed, the White House claimed, that this was merely a joke. But again, this is not the kind of joke, it seems to me, you want to make with a leader you don't know particularly well, and where the long historic relationship with Mexico has been troubled occasionally by American military intervention. It shows a certain ignorance, it shows a real insensitivity, and I think it also gets back to this really quite absurd situation that Trump got himself into by claiming he was going to build this wall and he was somehow going to get Mexico to pay for it. This was a great applause line on the campaign trail, but it makes absolutely no sense as a foreign policy position. Mexico doesn't want the wall. Mexico has no interest in the wall. And the idea that you're going to get another country to pay for something it doesn't want and has no interest in having just suggests that you don't understand how foreign policy works. And I'm afraid that's what we're dealing with our current president.
On the question of Israeli settlements, last Thursday, the White House said, quote, while we don't believe the existence of settlements is an impediment to peace, the construction of new settlements or the expansion of existing settlements beyond their current borders may not be helpful in achieving that goal. This might have surprised many, considering President Trump's choice of the Israeli U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, his bankruptcy lawyer, who actually heads up a fundraising effort for one of the settlements, has raised millions of dollars. Your response?
Well, first of all, I think the statement itself is just a lot of double talk. Everyone understands that the settlement project is an impediment to peace. It's one of the most important reasons why it's hard to create a viable Palestinian state. And, of course, the fact that the settler movement in Israel is dead set against any possibility of a Palestinian state, a position, by the way, I think also shared by the Netanyahu government, just reaffirms this. So to argue that existing settlements aren't a problem, but new settlements might be a problem, just doesn't add up, doesn't make sense. I also think that what we see here is that the Trump administration hasn't really figured out what its position is on Israeli-Palestinian peace or even its relationship with Israel. Yes, they're going to be very supportive, probably more pro-Netanyahu than any other previous American president has been. But I don't actually believe they want to get involved in the peace process at all. A couple of times, Trump has said that he was going to turn his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, over, put him on this problem and that he would solve it. Of course, this is someone with no foreign policy experience, no diplomatic experience as well. I think the bottom line here is the Trump administration is actually likely to be very bad for the Palestinians, but also very bad for Israel itself, because in effect they're going to allow Israel to continue to create an apartheid state in greater Israel, and that is not in Israel's long-term interest.
And Professor Walt, I'd like to ask you about the growing tensions with Iran. Obviously, the ban on the 7 Muslim nations, the one that's most affected Iran, with some 12,000 foreign students here in the United States, but also now National Security Advisor Flynn putting Iran on notice in terms of its missile testing. What does on notice mean?
Well, nobody knows what that means. Obviously, Iran knew we cared about their missile program. We have a contentious relationship with Iran. There are groups in the United States and in Iran who would like to try and improve the relationship, to try and build on the successful agreement to cap Iran's nuclear program. But there are also groups both in Iran and here in the United States who want to maintain a relationship that's highly conflictual and maybe want to go beyond that. And it seems to me that the Trump administration is aligning itself with those groups as well, wants to raise the temperature with Iran. I think this is playing with fire in a number of respects. One thing we know about Iran is they don't particularly respond well to American pressure. If we start threatening them militarily, if we start taking military action against them, that will give them an obvious incentive to try and restart their nuclear program. And that then places the United States in the position of whether or not it genuinely wants to go to war to try and prevent that. I think the Obama administration understood that that path was not the path we wanted to go down. I think we have to worry now, given the attitude of Mr. Trump and some of his closest advisors, that they actually see a conflict with Iran as being in the United States' interests. The big problem, of course, is they also seem to want to have a conflict with almost the entire Islamic world, while at the same time getting some of the members of the Arab or Islamic world to help us with ISIS. Again, this is just an example of where their policies are deeply contradictory and therefore are unlikely to succeed.
Finally, you just tweeted, new theory, you just tweeted, the media is not covering terrorism. Is Trump serious, delusional, incurably dishonest, all of the above? Donald Trump falsely claiming Monday during a speech to U.S. CENTCOM in Florida at the MacDill Air Base that the media is intentionally covering up terrorist attacks. Your response?
Well, again, I think that there's no evidence of this at all. If anything, I think the media has overcovered the problem of terrorism really ever since 9/11. It's why Americans greatly exaggerate the actual risks they are under. The risk that Americans face from a terrorist attack here in the United States is astronomically small, sort of 1 chance in 4 million. There are so many other things that are much more of a danger to us, much more of a problem that we should be worrying about.
We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Stephen Walt, thanks so much for joining us, Professor of International Relations at Harvard University. That does it for the show. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.